What I'm going to do is run through probably most of my early work because it kind of has really fed my whole career. So I'll start with, this is my early work. It's a chronological spiral, and it starts when I was a student at Pratt, and it goes up to the point when I did the Olympic program in Mexico. And I've done a lot of work since this, so I'm not going to get into a lot of that, but it's been very much in the same track. I specialized in iconography, I've specialized in branding, and I've specialized in wayfinding. So it's really been a process of putting iconography together as a systematic approach to branding and wayfinding. I studied industrial design at Pratt. They didn't teach graphic design at that point. They taught it at the graduate schools, and I met a student. Well, first of all, let me say I did industrial design as a student. This is one of the projects my mom and dad, they lost their home actually, and they were living in a trailer park. So my graduation address in my school graduation book from Pratt is a trailer park. And I thought, well, maybe I can give dignity to a trailer. So what I did was take a trailer that could open up and become three times its size. And this is back in 1959, so this is early on. And the school entered it into a competition, and it won an honorable mention in a kind of a national competition. So that was good. But that summer, between my junior and senior year, I was selected from the industrial design school. Now, I have to tell you, at this time in history, Pratt was a fairly stylized industrial design school. I don't know what they've been up to recently. I'm not that familiar with it. But I had a hard time dealing with designing in a stylized way. General Motors came around and interviewed all of the students in the industrial design school, and I was chosen to represent the school at General Motors. Now, this is a tech center, and that arrow is where the offices were, the design offices. So I met a student from Yale. Hiram Ash was his name, and he studied with Paul Rand up at Yale. And it was the first time I saw graphic design, and I don't think I've turned back yet. This was one of the student projects at General Motors. Was for Hyatt roller bearings. So I got started at that point in my career to start thinking of designing icons, logos, whatever you want to call them. This is me in my senior year, and you can see I had a lot of Saul Bass's posters on the wall, and I had really started getting into really being interested in graphic design. I was hired at General Motors. Let's see, this is my senior year. I was hired at General Motors after I graduated from Pratt, and the first job that I had a chance to do was the design of the Delco products symbol for General Motors. And as part of that, the packaging program for all of the Delco products was put out for competition, and I was working in their advanced design studio at General Motors. So I had a chance to submit, and we actually got the project in a competitive way, and I wound up designing not only the symbol, but the Delco package. And of course, this was, there were 1,200 different packages, and the manual was very, very important. So I learned how to apply my systematic thinking from industrial design to a graphic design project. I went into service after that. I didn't really want to continue at General Motors. I really was a very impactful experience, but I wanted to work in a smaller office. I went in the military. I was in advanced infantry, and I did a lot of map work, directing fire and so forth, and that was something that really has helped me also. When I got out of that, I stayed in Detroit, and I worked for a smaller office and had a chance to develop the graphics for a trade fair in Zagreb, Yugoslavia, and it was the American Pavilion. Now, the theme of the show was constructive use of leisure time. And now this was an interesting experience because I developed an hourglass and a moon and sun for daytime, nighttime activity. And we made it big. I think this is the largest thing I've ever done. Now I'm showing you this early work because it's all kind of, in my career, it gave me a chance to take the industrial design training that I went through and take really my developing love for doing graphic design and putting it together. And we did a lot of the entranceways to the fair and vacuum formed the hourglass shape and made the fence around the whole fairground. So it was really an exercise of taking a visual idea and putting it to work. And I like to think of developing icons or developing basic visual images in a program as designing a partner. You know, if you keep that in mind and if you design that way, it usually makes the whole program a lot easier to develop. So I came back to New York and worked with George Nelson. I was hired by Irving Harper, actually, who just passed away not that long ago. And Irving was the designer for the World's Fair Pavilion for Chrysler Corporation at the World's Fair here in New York. And it was an interesting project in as much as it had 5 islands. So the fair had an artificial lake and it was 5 islands. So I developed, it was for children, all of the rides and things were for children, and I developed a little hand, a pointing hand, that could be given to a child to wear, a VIP button. And it was very effective because these things were seen all over the fair site during the fair itself. But it was also very effective because I was able to take a branding element, so to speak, and transform it into a signage system. So it was really my first experience getting into wayfinding. And we put these signs around the fairgrounds to let you know what was on those 5 different islands. As part of the World's Fair work, I had done a lot of factory work. In fact, you know, I grew up over in Kearney, New Jersey. I was born in Newark, so I'm kind of a local guy. I grew up in Kearney, and I worked in factories in the summer. I could work 12-hour nights, 7 days a week, and pay for my whole tuition. But that was great. I don't think you can do that anymore. But the thing that I learned in the factory is, you know, all the things you have to be careful of in a factory. So I developed a series of safety posters for the children's ride. It was a production ride. And it was a process of taking a little character and putting him through all the things you have to watch out for in the factory. After the fair, Howard Miller Clock Company, which was one of George Nelson's clients, produced these as safety posters. And this was really fun because companies like DuPont had them in all their factories. So out of something designed for children, you know, a whole system of helping people watch their step in factories came out of it. Now, at that time, and this was just right, I did one more project after this, and then they had the Op Art show here in New York. And it was really an interesting thing for me because it was the first time I saw so much, you know, development of taking a flat surface, mostly that's what the show was about, and transforming it into energy and transforming it into movement. And I didn't know at this point that that would be one of the most helpful experiences I had, because at that time, one of the architects that was working at the Nelson office had worked on the Mexican pavilion here in New York. And he came and worked with the Nelson office, and they got the Olympic award to have the Olympics in Mexico City for 1968. Now, the architect of the Mexican pavilion went back to Mexico City, and the fellow I was working with, his name was Eduardo Terrazas, if you know him, stayed and worked with the Nelson office. The fellow that designed the Mexican pavilion designed the Museum of Anthropology. Remedios Vasquez is his name. And at that point, the Olympics were brought to Mexico by a former president, Lopez Mateos, and he got very sick. He became the chairman of the Olympic Committee. It was his effort to bring the Olympics for the first time to Latin America. He got very sick. He went into a coma and eventually passed away. And they made Remedios Vasquez the Olympic chairman, the chairman of the Olympic Committee. And he called his friend, well, his who worked with him on the exhibit here in New York, to come down to Mexico. And I was standing right next to him when he got the call. And he mentioned something. Eduardo mentioned something. I don't know what we're going to do about graphic design. Well, graphic design was a fairly new, endeavor here. I mean, we were kind of in the Mad Men period. We were good at advertising, but graphic design, it was people like Paul Rand that really brought it over from Europe, or brought the concept into Yale, and there were other schools that did that. So it was not really a well-known part of the design field here. So what happened, I found out that they were having a competition. It seemed like everything in my life went on in this year. It was 1966. I had gone to Peru earlier in the year with a photographer and, discovered Machu Picchu, and kind of was like discovering a timeless environment. And when the opportunity came up to participate in a competition for the Olympics, I really was interested in that. I knew nothing about Mexico, but I knew that I wanted more of that kind of timeless environment. So, okay, the 5 rings existed. This is Pierre Coubertin's contribution to the modern Olympics when it was regenerated again. I had just gotten married. Well, here was the deal. We went down to Mexico. I was working with Peter Murdoch at that point, who I had met at the Royal College on a vacation. And Peter came to New York, and we really worked well together, so we were going to start an office. And we go to Mexico. Here's Peter on the right. My wife, Neela, we were just married for 2 months, and me. And this is the very, very first day we landed in Mexico City. It's at the old Alameda Park. And the characters that we worked with, that's Eduardo on the left. That's Pedro Ramirez Vasquez next to him. He's the chairman of the Olympic Committee. And that's Matthias Goeritz. He did the Satellite Towers with Luis Barragan, if you're familiar with his work. That's Peter Murdoch, and that's myself. And this was Christmas 1966. We didn't have a tree, so we hung, the tree balls on the grating. So okay, we started out. And one of the things that I did, I didn't know anything about Mexico City. I didn't know anything about Mexico. I knew they had piñatas. I mean, that was the extent of my, I hung out over at the Museum of Anthropology. It was one of those kind of eye-opening kind of epiphany experiences. I really discovered the early cultures. I discovered the artisanía that was being done in all the different parts of Mexico. And at that time, the interesting thing is, I think the Mexican designers who were involved in graphic design, they didn't really dig into their own culture. I mean, they wanted to be like Europe, they wanted to be like Japan, which was pretty hot at that time in design, and the United States. So it was kind of an interesting experience to work with Ramirez Vasquez, because he was an architect that did, Mexican pavilions around the world for expos and World's Fairs, and they were very contemporary, but you knew you were in a Mexican pavilion. And it was really that philosophy that we adapted to develop the game, the graphics. Before computers, I love these guys. These are my compasses from back in 1966. And this is actually my first drawing where I discovered that the 5 rings could be generated into a 68. At first, I didn't like it because I couldn't separate the letter forms. So it was a matter of taking the 68, generated by around the rings, and then developing the typography from that to make the logotype Mexico 68. And each word that came out of that program was a design, effort in itself to get the overlap and the combination of all the letters. Going back to Bridget Riley and some of the artists at the Op show in New York, the Op Art show, it was just a natural to let the progression just continue out from the rings to the 68 to the Mexico 68, and just let it go. And that's me back then. I was 29 years old when I did that, so it was like a amazing thing to happen so early in my career. And we used it. I'm showing you some of the applications of the logotype and the expansion of the logotype, because it really developed the look for the games. I used it on postage stamps. It became the poster of the games. It was immediately successful. It was in the MoMA poster exhibition. I think that was like in '68, or it might even been before the Olympics. And we painted it on walls. Now, it's a pretty complicated image, and I honestly, I just admired the Mexican technicians that I worked with and the people that could do things like, I mean, you can see it's all penciled in and they painted it. And, you know, the walls were quite lovely around the city, and we printed fabric, and you didn't have to have the Mexico 68 when you saw part of the uniforms. All the guides had the striped uniforms. And then Eduardo and I did this is at MoMA right now. It's a model for the Milan Triennale. It was the Mexican pavilion at the Triennale. And it was basically an idea of taking the Mexico 68 floor plan, radiating Mexico 68, let it go up the walls, and it mirrored itself on the ceiling. So basically, it was a complete environment built around the logotype. So, one of the things I want to express also is that my industrial design training was so helpful. I mean, I could think in the third dimension, and when you're communicating and you can put images that are communicating images that are flat and you bring them into space, it was very exciting. I mean, I really enjoyed this type of work, and this program was wonderful. That was the opening day. That only happened on opening day. They realized it was a little dangerous to be sitting on the edge of the stadium on the logotype, but, you know. And from the logotype, I developed the complete typography. Now, the other part of getting back to spending all that time at the Museum of Anthropology, when this was first imaged, you know, when I had the image started, I put it all together, I cleaned it up, and people started coming in and wanting copies of it. I mean, that's, you know, it was a 2-week period that we were down there. 5 weeks went by, and I had to go into the architect's office and say, what's happening? You know, we've been here 5 weeks now. Did we win? He goes, oh, I guess so. I mean, it was like a weird experience. And one of the things that happened, as I mentioned, people came in and they wanted to have copies of it. And if you look at a lot of the imagery that comes out of the early cultures, this is not that early, but if you look at the Olmec in the very early cultures, and this gets right up into probably Aztec in Mexico City, a lot of lineal work, and they were so good at making images. I mean, they did natural images, they did mythological images, they did plant life, animal life, just wonderful. They were great designers. And today, you know, you have a lot of examples of artisania. The families are still doing it, and it's very alive and rich. It's a big part of the Mexican culture. And we had actually, this is a Huichol wool painting. We had the Huichol Indians come in to the Museum of Anthropology, and we gave them a board with the 68 on it. And what they do is they take the board, cover it with wax, and then press wool into it. So they did that for us, and we had them almost, it was like having them be a consultant for color. And what we were able to do is take the basic structure, the geometry, and just change the color. And it was always part of the program, and it allowed us to do many publications, and they were all different. And the additive of that was that it was very Mexican also, because it's a very colorful culture. And it was very helpful for me, the parallel lines. I did a lot of stamps. The final issue was a real mix of different, you know, subject matters. And I was radiating everything by this point, and that's the stamps. But also for the environment and getting back into the spatial characteristics of Mexico City itself, you know, radiating out of the entrances, exit entrance areas of the different stadiums on the plazas. You know, when you flew in, this was really beautiful to see this. And actually, this was the university stadium. Japan in Tokyo, 4 years earlier, spent a lot of money on the architectural expressions. Mexico couldn't afford it, so in this way, we were able to bring a lot of the older installations into being part of the Olympics with the radiating lines. We explored a lot of different materials and different ways of imaging, and these are large balloons. And we applied the Mexico 68 radiating on them, and these were flown in different colors above the entrances of the stadium. So you could see from the roadways that you were approaching an Olympic venue. Okay, well, that's part of it. And, there's a lot of, a lot of ways that we use that, and it was a very effective basic logotype. But the other part, and now I want to really kind of focus on icons, because it gave me a chance to really hone my abilities to develop systems of icons. And we developed two systems. In Tokyo, they did a stick figure expression of the different sporting events, the athletes. In Mexico City, we focused on a part of the body or a piece of equipment or a combination of the two, and developed an icon for each. They had 19 sporting events in those Olympics, and we developed an icon using that technique. When water was involved, it became part of the background or the base of the symbol. One thing that was important was, as I mentioned before, to not only develop a program that said, we're the Olympics and these are the events and this is all of the things you have to know about and how to get to places and everything, but we wanted to keep it Mexican. We wanted to create a sense of place. And one of the things that you don't have to look too deep to see the iconography that was used in some of the early cultures. I believe this is Mayan. So by keeping the iconography kind of image-based and not character-based as far as the full figure, we were able to give it a look that was colorful and was also visually somehow simpatico or sympathetic to the early cultures again. And we never used, one of the things I didn't mention that was really important, when we started the program, Ramirez Vasquez said, don't make a Mexican sitting under a cactus tree with a tequila. That's not our image. We don't want to go there. And that was really it, And the other thing was dictated by the Olympic program itself. You could use the rings. You had to use the rings. You could use them. You had to use the rings. You had to use 3 languages. In Mexico, it was Spanish, French, and English. So any signs that you use language on had to be in 3 languages. And any of you that are involved in signage, it's hard enough to use 1 language. So here's an example where we didn't use any language except for the symbols, and they worked. And this was 1968, and I mean, yes, for the Olympics, it's understandable that symbols were developed as more of a custom for the Olympic sporting events, and I'll show you later on, getting into work after that, symbols at that time were thought to be for illiterate people. And when it came time to use them in city programs, it was like, hey, we're not illiterate, and symbols are going to indicate that we're illiterate here. So it was a real battle to use iconography. Now it's not. I mean, now we're inundated with iconography. But anyway, it started for me personally right here. Now the other thing is, there was a lot of information that had to be put into the environment in many different ways. And one of the things that I always liked about the early Olympics, the Greek silhouettes on their pottery mostly, but they were beautiful and they really gave you the sense of, they had action, they had motion. And I used for 2 reasons. One, because of the Greek silhouettes, and the other is that they didn't have any registration in the printing. So this is my first series of postage stamps for the Olympics there. It was like dropping out the Mexico 68 of a green background and overprinting black. So, there wasn't really much of a registration problem. And if you took one stamp and placed it next to itself, that getting the action was accomplished. So the stamps themselves became a really important basic image for the overall image of the Olympics in Mexico. Now, the silhouettes were one of the real workhorses, and I mentioned before that if you can design these basic elements as like a partner, something you can use to work for you. And I used the silhouettes, again, to try to avoid language, to indicate all of the things that you had to know to get from the street to your seat in the stadium. And basically, it's a system of silhouettes, and it's used. I mentioned the sports symbols are the only way that the sports were called out. Mexico 68 is a proper name. Estadio 68 is a proper name of the stadium. October 14 is, if you can read, there is a limitation, Roman alphabet and so forth. So I mean, if you didn't read that, you're in a little bit of trouble, but you didn't really have to read too much. And the other thing is that all the tickets on October 14 had an olive ground background, and all the areas in the stadiums that you had to find your seat in were color-coded. So if you were looking for, at the stadium, if you're looking for entrance 13 at the door, you'd have the same symbol that's on the ticket and the number 13 and the blue area. So, and this really worked, and I've never had a chance to do anything as simple as this that was so complex. I'd like to have a chance, and I think now, of course, with the technology, there's a lot of, a lot of need to do some of this type of programming in the virtual world, and we're all learning how to do that. So the background was the color of the day. The line of color was the, So again, we had a very colorful expression, again, being part of Mexico. Now, now this is where I started really feeling, the power of symbology or iconography, and we had a cultural program. Now this was really interesting because it was the first country to have a cultural program where they had 16 cultural events. And the idea is to send invitations to all the participating nations to participate in any one of these cultural events. Now, the program didn't really exist. It existed as a bunch of symbols in a brochure. We sent it to all the embassies around the world, and it was distributed, and it worked. We had a very, very powerful cultural program. Now, here's where I started learning things that would help me in later work. If you look at the background shape, it's based on that lower right-hand corner, which is letting the 68 radiate out to a point where it encompassed the rings, but it gave you a distinctive background shape. And this was very helpful in developing the various program icons, because they weren't sports, they were cultural. We didn't get into color. We either used black and white or silver or gray. And I mean, they had programs for children. They had programs that were specific places. This is when the flame came into Mexico City, and they lit it on top of Teotihuacan. This was the program for peace. They had advertising for peace. Billboards all over the city were using this and images for world peace. Well, there wasn't just world peace going on then. Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated here in the States. And actually, the Mexican government was the first country in the world to issue a stamp commemorating Dr. King, and I had the opportunity to design that. So this is really the first use of the peace symbol. And then, of course, we had the student riots, which was really a fantastically horrible experience. And there were over 500 students killed. And this happened maybe a couple of weeks before the Olympics started. And I remember very clearly, my wife was there with me, and I'd come home. We were isolated in the Olympic Committee, so I didn't really know what was going on. But she said, I saw tanks in the street today, on Reforma in Mexico City. And in Tlatelolco, where they had the big blow-up with the confrontation with the government and the students, about 500 or so kids were killed. So there was a lot of student posters that were done like this, using the dove, using all of the graphics from the Olympics. And it was such a powerful experience to see all of this work transformed and out in the street being very protesting to the government. And I was really torn. I mean, I wasn't a lot older than the students, and I'm working for the government, and they're killing students. And this was an interesting personal experience because I gave a talk, it was about 1986. And the rector of the school, after the talk, gave me a book. And now this is years after the Olympics, and he said, I'm sorry we couldn't do this earlier, but the government wouldn't let us. He says, but I want to thank you personally for creating a language, a visual language, that I could use as one of the students. He was doing these things when he was a kid, when he was a student. Now he's the rector of the school. I mean, it was really an emotional experience for me to hear that, because I always felt a little, I use the term dirty, I couldn't do anything about, but I was part of the program in the way I was. Last year, they asked me to do a memorial logo for the Tlatelolco. So this is for the museum now that has documented all of that period. And I thought it'd be interesting to take the dove and treat it like a phoenix, coming out of the 68, so they're using that. Also, last year I had an exhibition at MUAC, M-U-A-C, and it's part of the University of Mexico. And I had a real retrospective. It was called Coming and Going, and it was called Urban Icons. That's what I'm really talking about today. This is the poster for that. And the idea of putting icons in an urban environment has really been the basis of my career for most of my career, actually. And it was interesting because they reconstructed some of the things that I had done in my early career. So it really was a good historical overview of some of this early work. After the Olympic program, I had a chance to work with the new metro that was just starting in Mexico City. And this is where I really ran into a lot of discussions about iconography being only for illiterate people. And thank God I was able to push it through. And these types of programs have to happen from the top down. You can't do an Olympic program unless you're kind of in tune with whoever's running it. So it was like working for a good dictator in a way. And this was the same thing. I had gotten into the program from the Olympics because I had I was kind of known at that point for doing the graphics for the Olympics. And I worked with Bernardo Quintana, who is the head of ICA, which was one of the largest construction companies in Latin America. They were building the metro. So when I was able to present an idea, it was right from the top down. And so the first idea was the metro itself, the idea of running the 3 lines. They inaugurated the system with 1, 2, 3 lines. And so I developed the M, and that's the logo. I filled it with orange because the trains are orange. Okay, I developed a typography based on the geometry of the logo, the M logo. And this is where the iconography came in. And this is where the experience of doing the cultural program was a very, very helpful experience for me to be able to suggest this and to be able to do it. Now, these are 8 stations on line 1, and we did the first 3 lines. And basically, here's the thing that was very interesting. Icons for sports were a tradition. We developed icons for all the services. That was not a tradition necessarily, but it was happening. This was maybe not that many years before the Department of Transportation here developed. This is one of the models that was used for the system here. And then that gray line is all of the icons for the cultural program. And the background shape was, it was a kind of magical thing for me. And when I did the metro, I kept the metro M shape, and it was a really good way of putting everything together and giving a visual separation that was very clear between the icons. And this is the line map when the first 3 lines were there, but they hadn't opened line 2 and 3 yet. So this is the icons on the first line. Now, where this becomes really operative and where it has become something that has been embraced, this is like, it's almost 50 years ago. And the city still, they have 12 lines now. They've developed the icon system throughout the 12 lines. And I'll talk a little bit about when I'm finished. I've been doing studies now in Mexico City where we might do a transportation-based overview of all of the systems, from the trains down to the bikes, and keep it all under a transportation, both in imaging and in mapping and all of those things, so people can, get a sense of, the systems being a coordinated part of the city. And one of the things that worked really, really well is when you put the line map in the car, if I would have known some of the things I know now, like, for example, it really transcends the language. Even if the language is a name, it's still in the Roman lettering. And if you come from a culture that doesn't, understand or read the Roman lettering, you can still use the system. And you can tell your friend to meet you at the butterfly station, or So, and I was smart enough to keep the difference between things, but I lost it a little bit as far as not doing a manual and making that a very basic principle, because I got a call. It was in the last line that they did, and it was a newspaper article on it, and they had, it was line 12, and the icons were all done they look like Aztec symbols. And I told the guy that called me, I said, hey, I don't even think the Mexicans can tell you what those symbols mean, you know? So that was a little disheartening in a way, but it was a good lesson. And now I might have a chance to go back in and, you know, update that. But, you know, going down, like if you were going to stop at the station that had the cannon, Balderas, you know, there you go. There's the cannon right there. And the last time I was down, in part of my research for what we're doing now, I went on one of the lines that I didn't do the symbols on, and went down to the last station in the line is one of the most, you know, in the street, chaotic parts of Mexico City. And you know, there's the icon on the sign for the metro. I mean, that's kind of an indexing system that works in any environment. And I took the ride. It was an interesting thing. I didn't do it as a designer. I just wanted to experience something that I didn't do except for the concept of the system. And it was an interesting experience because I was able to know exactly where all the stations were, but I started getting interested in the city itself. You know, like why that symbol? And it was a good, healthy experience to see how important that can be for a city, for someone visiting or even living in the city. Anyway. Came back to New York in 1971 and started the office of Wyman and Cannon. Now, Bill Cannon was one of the vice presidents at the Nelson office, so I knew Bill, and he was also in school at the same time I was. So we started the office it was 1971, and we worked together for about 9 years, and we had a very, very good, productive 9 years. One of the first jobs was the metro mapping system for the metro in Washington, D.C. We did all the neighborhood maps, and we also did the diagram map. Now, this was a very recent experience where they asked me to redesign the diagram because they were bringing in a line from Dulles Airport, and it went right through the center of town. And what was interesting about it is that the map itself had become an icon, a recognizable, likable icon for Washington. And when they did all of their focus groups, no one wanted to change the map. You know, so it was almost like designing camouflage. I had to bring that line in and go all the way through the center of town. So I had to reduce the line weights a little bit, and it pretty much is the same map now. So that's great. So what I'd like to do, if you're interested in asking me any questions, let me just mention that during the exhibit at MWAC in Mexico City, there's a book published that has 11 of my projects in Mexico City, and they did a very good job. I've done things there like the Papalote Children's Museum, the Central de Abasto, the Central Market in Mexico City. So I must be a reincarnated Mexican because I just love Mexico and I love working there. So, and what just came out, published by Unit Editions, is a monograph, and Adrian Shaughnessy and Tony Brook did just an absolutely beautiful job. I mean, I'm so proud of this book. They went into a lot of personal things that I've had the experience. I mentioned the factory to you. My father was a fisherman. He ran a boat off the coast here, so I spent a lot of time on the ocean, and it's kind of like a no-nonsense environment, and I think those types of experiences, factory the same way, really have fueled me as far as being a designer is concerned. And it was kind of fun looking back at all of that with Tony and Adrian. My website homepage is an interactive spiral. You can go through it and delineate, urban projects, transportation systems, museums, commercial, and so forth. And I mean, that's it. Thanks. So.